When I was much younger and visiting my grandfather in Leicestershire, we would go for walks around the area where he lived, and within an urban landscape we would stop and pick wild watercress. It grew in a woodland stream that ran by the playing fields near his house, and this would be used and eaten in the forthcoming days. My walk this evening in the Brecon Beacons is through a man-made construction just like this landscape near my grandfather and the cityscape where I work. The connection between man and nature is plain to see as I walk in these fields, just as it is when walking under the trees and through parks in the city. However, everything's structured to suit our needs. Now, I think the time has come to alter the balance in the city, to rethink, restructure, and rewild it. Our connection to the earth is instinctive and innate, something that we've had from birth. It's where we come from and where we'll go back to. Walt Whitman expressed it well. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. The ultimate recycling, our bond to the earth is eternal. We all feel better walking along a riverbank or through a wood, picking a blackberry from a hedgerow. The surge and movement of the water and leaves is our default ambient. Willa Cather probably says it better. The earth was warm under me, and warm as I crumbled it through my fingers. I kept as still as I could. Nothing happened. I did not expect anything to happen. I was something that lay under the sun and felt it, like the pumpkins, and I did not want to be anything more. I was entirely happy. Perhaps we feel like that when we die and become a part of something entire, whether it is the sun and air or goodness and knowledge. At any rate, that is happiness, to be dissolved into something complete and great. When it comes to one, it comes as naturally as sleep. When I was with my grandfather, I didn't pay much attention when picking the wild watercress, and now it seems such a romantic concept. However, this is exactly what I want to bring back and begin rewilding our urban landscape, introducing an element of foraging into our everyday life, connecting humans and nature at a local scale, something that has become of great value throughout the pandemic. Pantheist William Blake saw this when he wrote, "To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower." Man and nature's relationship needs to be symbiotic, and we need to be aware of and nurture this all-pervasive organic energy.
My project in South India looks at water distribution and management systems amid rapid urbanization of rural farmlands in order to reinstate this precious resource as truly common. The infrastructural tapestry. Infrastructural interventions are the key physical elements that collect, store, distribute water through various mechanisms. In this network, large open public storage tanks form the main foundation in storing water. A kit of parts water catchment structure directs the collected water to the tanks through small channels, mimicking the Fallard system. Higher level water tanks can also be used to store water as they help in generating electricity. The main focus of these catchment units is to drive the rain runoff directly to the groundwater table. The modular structure is better suited because it could be transported with ease in small locally owned vehicles and reconstructed wherever necessary. And finally, to maintain the mechanism of water collection, a suitable mobile communication network remains crucial in rural areas. The material tapestry. This illustration describes the crucial materials that are needed to construct these interventions. Almost every material used in this tapestry are procured within the confines of my South Indian town. Bamboos are quite common, if not several logs could be used to create the panels that form the catchment roof and holds the structure in ground. Cow dung mixed with small proportion of mud is often used as plaster for rural houses can be procured to solidify the panels. Lime, which can be generated within the site, functions as additional layer of plaster if needed. Coir from coconut plantation is used for tying these panels and bamboos together for construction. Rice husks from farm could be used to strengthen the cow dung mud mixture. Other organic waste, such as seeds, also complement overall construction. The immaterial tapestry. This tapestry describes the necessary governance and other immaterial stakeholders that needs to be dealt with in the community. Domestic animals waste produced in these farms are almost free of cost and extremely sustainable for construction. No skilled labor is necessary for this construction. Teaching the construction technique once will multiply with ease. Already existing channel network from farm irrigation system can be tapped into for water distribution from the catchments. Local panchayats can take over governance from state as they carry local landscapes knowledge. And through this shift in governance, it becomes crucial to have the collective, coordinated effort of all these players to maintain this infrastructure for themselves and their future.
I want to tell the story of a lost voice, one of many, and how through learning from our non-human world we can learn to mutate, transform and regenerate our lost voices. Bridging the formal and informal through empowerment, education and equality, the journey transcends the characters through communication, with the driver, the local person who wants change, the mutator.
We realised the huge demand for good quality, affordable homes for residents. We plan to build 100 affordable homes in Limehouse.
It's a valuable area, the only green space on Salmon Lane.
It's a conflict between housing versus trees.
More appropriate sites in the area could be used as purpose dwellings.
What are we going to do about reclaiming our triangle?
I am happy to represent our community. We need to understand our public rights and understand if there is a fight worth taking.
We need to fight for our health and quality of life and the huge cost to the environment and biodiversity, reclaim and reinstate.
How can we rally more support?
Have you heard of the MTR organisation? They'll connect us with the people we need whilst raising awareness.
I have not come across the MTR organisation before. How can I find out about them?
The MTR organisation can be found on social media platforms. It was advertised to me on Instagram.
So how does the MTR organisation work?
The idea behind the organisation is to empower local people in the face of higher powers, so they too can have a voice that is heard. It works by informing you on your public rights, connecting you with the right people, and they have initiatives to raise awareness and rally support.
I will get in contact as soon as possible.
Now you're aware of your public rights to contest this application and you can advise what is best for your community. What action would you like to take first?
On behalf of Limehouse, I would like to exercise my right for consultation and consequently start a petition. We have a lot of support within the area.
To be able to have a successful petition, it's vital we gain support from those outside of Limehouse too.
I do not have any connections outside of Limehouse. How do you suggest I make these connections? Will people be able to respect the area as much as we do if they are not local?
The first thing we can do is raise awareness of the issue at one of our weekly markets. This will make a start to rally support.
The market will be a great opportunity to connect with people across all sectors.
It's important that we create a strong campaign to show the triangle from your community's point of view and advertise this at market.
We hope you have learned something new about our community and view the triangle in a different light today.
We didn't understand the impact this site has had on the community in the past. We are taking this into consideration.
As the underground network continues to do what it does best, we must use our tool of communication to coexist in better harmony, the ecology of public rights and non-human rights. By taking advantage of non-political metaspace in which to build these bridges, we can look towards an equal and empowered sense of community.
(2019) COVID strikes. The unsustainable international food networks that the UK rely upon are exposed, and the empty promises of past politicians are laid as bare as the supermarket shelves. In 2006, Ken Livingstone assured Londoners of a new food strategy. This would allegedly support a vibrant food economy and improve the city's food security. However, the 4 UK supermarket leaders refused to support this vision, as it threatened their monopoly. Without their backing, Ken's mission failed, and now in the presence of a pandemic, the system has broken down. The end of 2021 sees protests break out around the UK. Brits demand systemic change, starting with basics. Bread, a simple food but a staple one. Government is forced to act. Newly implemented policy renders international mass baking methods illegitimate, which effectively restructures the UK bread economy. The UK's industrial bakeries that once supplied 80% of bread are now rendered obsolete for the time being. Janet lives in Erith, in the suburbs of London. One day she receives a voucher in the post from the Wheat Shack, a local bakery that used to be the old Hovis factory down the road. She remembers the protests of 2021, which had led to it closing down. Intrigued, she orders a loaf via their app. Upon delivery, she finds that printed on the wrapping is an invitation to share it with friends and a short tale of bread's history in the UK. She does so, and during the meal, they read the tale together. At the end, they a further invitation to get involved with their outreach programs. That weekend, they turn up to help transform a neighbour's garden into an urban farm, whilst earning points to cash in for more bread. She continues to help over the summer, enjoying the excuse to get outside and meet neighbours. At the end of the summer, a harvest festival is thrown at the factory, and they share amazing food provided by local businesses and connect with more neighbours that they'd never bumped into before. This converted harvest factory is now a food hub, hosting a brewery, greenhouses, microfarm, grain deposit, and a local bakery. These programs work in synthesis with one another to produce a series of sustainably produced goods. In addition to the gardening club, the hub hosts school trips, baking and brewery classes, runs apprenticeship schemes and throws celebrations throughout the year, all of which gather local residents together and reconnects urban communities to the food systems that feed them. Over the few years, new local food producers have been set up, and the once pristine, manicured lawns of Erith have been turned into rich ecosystems that produce food and feed the local community. And the Harvest Festival is quickly becoming the biggest event of the year.
Inside the narrowness of the valleys, and there's a consequence, I believe, of the drudgery and danger of work, whether it was in coal or in steel or heavy engineering. There was a real demand for a wider cultural experience.
Algae Records.
This record began its journey in the repurposed site of Port Talbot Steelworks. Using the leftover heat and CO2 of the steelworks as catalyst for algae growth, algae is grown in our greenhouses. The algae are then harvested and dried before being set down to the record workshop. Here the algae goes through a manufacturing process perfected by both material science researchers and steelwork employees. The workshop aims to open up the slowly decommissioned site to the public. Using existing reservoirs and aided by the excess CO2 in the water, algae grows at an extraordinary rate. Algae is harvested by members of the public and then transferred to our harvest station. People can then cash in their algae for a free blank record. At the top of the old cooling tower lies a single recording lathe. Here the public can record any track they wish onto their blank new record and play it for the town to hear. Based on the ideas of sympathetic resonance, the spaces use the existing noise pollution and vibrations of industry to aid the desired acoustic sound, act as a venue for local artists and a place for the public to play and exchange records. If Britain is to have a role in the manufacturing industry, it is one of academic research and material innovation. A fundamental flaw with material research is getting those materials to market. The key concept of this scheme is to bridge the gap between academic proposals on material science and a commercially viable product. Existing steelworkers will stay on to provide expertise on how to scale up ecologically based innovation. This will work in tandem with material science researchers on a residency basis, a multidisciplinary collaboration team. Here the production team and research team can come together to test and address material science-based issues. Therefore, a long-term goal is to have numerous eco-material-based workshops slowly occupying the steelworks site. The steelworks can continue to run in the early stages of this intervention, and depending on the success of this new workshop typology, labs can continue to grow within the site. Algae Records is an example of utilising the material science research with the existing workforce to create a cultural product.
I can't wait to escape the confines of this fucking run-down place. There's no future.
I'm Damaris, and welcome to Chosen Kin, a sanctuary where young children can reevaluate and reset their relationships with bacteria. Bacteria could be really scary, especially with COVID-19 around, but they are everywhere, including your entire body, even when you are clean. 57% of our cells are made up of microbes like bacteria. This is to say, we need them to stay alive and healthy. Bacteria in kombucha make cellulose fibers during fermentation that transform into a similar material to leather. Anyone can use them to create purses, hats, dresses, and bags that are sustainable and beautiful to look at. Chosen Kin is a summer school program in partnership with nearby kombucha breweries, primary schools, and the upcoming cultural hub in East London. It aims to educate, fascinate, and equip young children through the unpacking of bacterial cellulose and integration of new exciting networks into Here East. Located on the third floor of the gantry in Here East, the space is divided into 2 wiki houses and a courtyard. The brewery space is for preparing the mixture, growing the sheets, and treating them. The workshop space is for making and designing using bacterial cellulose. The courtyard is a central space for drying the sheets in direct sunlight and connecting both wiki houses. And last, the safe room is for book reading, presentations, and for the children to talk through their emotions and worries.
It's pretty loud in here. Do you hear that? Sounds like bubbles. My name is Brett, by the way, and I'm a yeast cell. It's pretty weird that, isn't it? Talking yeast cell. But anyway, before I get into that, it's probably best that I start from the beginning. It's a Friday evening, and I'm at the New Vox Brewery Tap House in Sunderland. And by the looks of things, I'm about to be converted into beer. I can't wait. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time now. Hello! I must be in the fermentation tank.
Yeah, I think you just drop it on
Hello?
the game board.
Hey, can you hear me?
What character did we get? Brett?
Hey, that's me.
What's that? Ah, yes, that's so lame.
Who said I'm lame?
Every franchise, wherever you go within the country, will always look the same because it's built out the same way. Your generation, I suppose, will not be any different in a few years' time because, as you said, everybody lives.
Due to the now commercialised space of the pub, you have become all but phased out of this palace for the people. Due to your often rebellious fermentation habits or the occasional spoil, your sister, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or Sarah as you know her, is a favourite of the pub company, as she is predictable and, by extension, marketable. Approach the pub company team and remind them of the role you played in creating the historic Maxim Ale.
Hey, we can help with that. Our team is Clive Chesser, the CEO of Punch Tavern. We're looking for ways to expand our transient customer base, maybe by reintroducing a historic ale back into Vox. We can encourage some of the community that surround us back into our premises. We will give you a 10% buffer on spoilage.
Deal. Let's go and collect our tokens. Hey, does that beer look like it's been released?
Something's happening.
I think we need to collect more tokens from the trade floor to finish the bottling process.
Okay, let's grab a quick drink first.
Pub companies such as Punch Taverns have purged the public house of time, tradition and localism, creating marketable fetishised spaces as a tool for the capitalistic class. Intoxication Station demonstrates how play can be used as an interactive tool to combat this sanitisation of culture, creating a living architecture and localism that anchor the working class communities of Sunderland into the new Vox Tap House proposal, creating a palace for the people.
Hello, hello, 1 2 1 2. Testing. Hopefully you can hear us. I believe you probably can. Welcome back, everybody. Good evening to those who weren't here earlier, and welcome back to everyone that was. You're in the MArch Unit 1 broadcast, so I suspect you probably know that already. For those who don't know, my name is Cameron. I'm hosting today's broadcast. I work on the course as an archivist, and I've also been delving into the world of broadcasting MArch over the last few months. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks so much to everyone for having me. Really, really excited to introduce this amazing cohort of students who've produced some really incredible work under the super tough conditions of the pandemic. So the first year of the MArch course, Unit 1, is split into 3 groups or labs. The broadcast you've just seen shows off the amazing work that emerges from Lab B, which focuses on materials, taught by Sital Solanki and Natsai Audrey Chiesa. Earlier on at lunchtime, we saw the work of Lab A, which is a technology lab tutored by Suhair Khan and Jaden Ali. And directly after this session, so from 7 to 8, we'll be seeing the work of Lab C, movement, taught by Dr. Adeshola Akile and Akil Scaife-Smith. We'd really love to take some questions from the audience, so get yourselves ready. But first, I'm going to hand over to Eloise, who will tell you a little bit more about the work from Lab A. Over to you, Eloise.
Hi all, we hope you enjoyed our videos. So as part of Lab B, the Materials Lab, this year we've been focused on giving the non-human world a voice to be heard through depicting our extractive relationships with materials and how we can reorient ourselves to futures that are diverse, inclusive and response-able. We've begun to understand the non-human world. We started our journey through our material horoscopes. I am Cancer, so I was yeast. The materials range from plastic to foam to charcoal, bacteriocellulose and paper. We became our materials and started the journey to make better kin with the material world. Where our research has emerged to today has stemmed from these initial explorations diving into the non-human world. On behalf of the lab, we would like to say a big thank you to our tutors, Sital and Natsai, and members of Faber Futures, who have, we'd like to say thank you to opening our eyes to a new world beyond the one we know, and continuously pushing us to delve deeper into our materials and truly learning to respect the non-human world. So thank you.
Thanks, Eloise. Looks like Flint really is becoming his material over here. Before we launch into the questions, maybe everyone can quickly run us through or remind us in the order that we saw the films, what they were looking at, what they've been talking about, and then that should kind of jog everyone's memory before we dive in.
Hey, so yeah, I went first. And my project was looking at how we can begin to sort of rewild our urban landscape using derelict office space as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, and using that space to connect humans with nature, introduce elements of food production and foraging, and then all the human and planetary benefits that come with it. And so my video was just trying to capture the essence of what I wanted to bring to these spaces in the urban environment and the feelings that it evokes and its calming nature. Thanks.
Hi guys, it was my video on the tapestries that you saw, and my project was about how to position the water as commons in rural contexts of South India, and then the project is basically a combination of 2 theories of Eleanor Ostrom's governments of commons, and then Jeremy Rifkin's ideas to infuse technology into it as well, and then in a way that it complements the agriculture production in South India. Yep, that's about it.
Hi, I'm Jacob. My video was the like the crazy music video looking thing. So through a social spatial study of plastic, I uncovered the harmful truths about our current recycling system. The UK exports almost all of its recyclable waste to other countries for other countries to deal with. Recycling is expensive and laborious, making it non-viable economically in the UK. So my proposal suggests that by directly recycling waste into something of high value, in this case, luxury fashion, the recycling system can be afforded in the UK, preventing the export of recyclable waste. In my project, I propose a new production framework that combines recycling and garment making into a single cottage industry production chain, processing PET plastic bottles into luxury nylon garments at local recycling plants and from the comfort of people's homes. The project seeks to set a precedent for future fashion brands, with the global aim of reducing waste colonialism and the local aim of providing meaningful interactions within the suburban areas of London through dignified and collaborative labour. The broadcast video serves as an advertisement for this new brand, showing off a gilet that I constructed from recycled plastic. And it aims to subvert traditional fashion campaigns by revealing the process in which the garment is made, as well as the contributors, which are oftentimes hidden. Thanks.
So my video was the story of lost voices. I have been researching a network of informal economies that draw on exchanges between the microbial world and aspects of human culture. I've been particularly looking at how we can use mycelium as a metaphor in which to build our networks. And I've been focusing on using communication as a mechanism and unpoliticized space as a tool. And I wanted to kind of show these elements within the story of the lost voices and show how the network could drive progressive social equality.
My project was focusing on food, looking at the culture, politics, and infrastructure that surround it. So much of our food in the UK today is cheap, unhealthy, mostly eaten alone and produced unsustainably. And this really needs to change as we wrestle to adapt in response to the climate crisis and other crises that we're facing. The bread industry in particular is quite interesting. It's a staple food that 99% of British households buy, but in the last 2 centuries, it's been totally transformed. Its nutritional value is mostly gone, and it requires far more energy than ever to produce it. And my project imagines how the infrastructure of the current system can be leveraged to support a new sustainable and ethical system, one that provides a framework for new food cultures to emerge, that reinvigorate urban communities and encourages people to be part of the food or part of a food network rather than just consuming from it. That's me.
Hi, sorry I've been immersed by the phone, but hopefully you can still work me out. So my project was on repurposing extractive industries with a focus on Port Talbot to create a new typology of a material workshop that bridges the gap between academic research on material science and a commercially viable product. Cheers.
Hi, my project is a sanctuary that allows for the resetting of relationships between young children and bacteria. It allows to support them with their emotions in relation to the COVID-19 outbreak. Since the first lockdown was put in place in March 2019, there's been a constant increase in the OCD levels and fear of microbes in children, specifically between 4 to 16. I also explored the possibilities of microbial cellulose as a tool to increase awareness and boost familiarity with microorganisms and biofabrication.
Hey everyone, my project began with the discovery of Brettanomyces, which is a species of yeast. It situates itself on the protagonistic character Brett, as a personified character being myself, and it looks to hack the current sanitized pubscape and subsequent pub core typology. It inserts itself within the new Box Brewery and Tap House in Sunderland, an area I'm local to. And this playful active form of governance offers alternative ways of processing yeast, aiming to foster new relationships between material and immaterial characters. It aims to question who are the actors, agents, cheaters, and jokers of this form of palace for the people.
Super. Thanks so much, guys. Really exciting work. There's already some great questions in the chat. I'm going to go straight to Citals right at the beginning. Wondering how you're all now considering materials within architecture. What has been the most influential part?
I don't mind jumping in on this one. I think for me personally, coming from a kind of traditional architecture background, I received the material yeast, and I didn't first think that was I didn't see that as a spatial material at all. I viewed it as a Kuchen material. However, as I began researching Brett and the story of Brett, I began realizing that his actual issue was very spatial, in fact, and him being at the center of a gathering in the pub, and his journey itself, how that directly affects me. So kind of through giving material that respect, I guess, I was able to uncover kind of these very spatial issues.
To add on Callum's point as well, I think I also had the material of yeast, and I had never really considered it even as a material, more as kind of an element of food. And thinking how much yeast, I did research initially into how it relates to sort of wine and bread, and how much infrastructure is based upon wine and bread as, I don't know, sole entities. So it's interesting to again think about materials in a spatial concept that you had never really considered of being spatially before.
Yeah, I was quite similar. My material was foam, as you can see. And basically I started looking at foam as a lens in which to explore workers' exploitation. And then from that, decided to move on to looking at workers' exploitation in Wales. So it's quite an interesting way to navigate that sense of learning.
Yeah, now I consider materials as something more than just something to be used. Materials are a lot more than just their tactile qualities. There's lots of connections and things to uncover, and issues and things that you might not have thought about before.
So my material was microbiocellulose, and through analyzing and looking at the material, I noticed that the symbiotic relationship that bacteria and yeast have in a piece of SCOBY can be looked at and like studied in a way that we could translate back to architecture, in a way where architecture and nature could coexist and mutually benefit from this interaction we have.
Yeah, I think as said before, kind of what struck me through looking at materials is definitely the infrastructure behind it, and kind of looking at how materials evolve as culture evolves, and the kind of the leftover spaces that are a result of that, and yeah, just the sheer weight of that, and then thinking about, you know, all the materials we use in our buildings. What's the kind of infrastructure that's left over when fashion changes or trend changes, and all these systems are set up, and how do we create systems that are more flexible and kind of respond to trends in fashion in a more sustainable way, or counter that.
Super, thanks everyone. Really nice to, I thought what you said, Jacob, about material as something to use versus material as something in its own right. It's very interesting. Maybe that's something that can be expanded on, I don't know. But in the meantime, I'll jump to Jaden's question. Jaden asks, how will you be challenging your placement hosts to reimagine their relationship to materials?
That's quite a tough one. I think I'm trying to find placement within social policy. So I think something to do with engaging local councils to work more thoroughly, so they consider materials as a top priority, and the environmental effects of that is probably my main aim.
I think maybe that connects really well with Matsai's question, which was next. And maybe that's a good way to continue the conversation in terms of thinking about different relationships with materials, and how I don't know, different value systems, or how we can push an agenda through thinking about materials. So Natsai says, it's really exciting to see how ambitious you've all been in unpacking the socio-political and economic systems your work deals with. What kinds of challenges did you have to overcome in order to do this, and in the context of decolonizing and decarbonizing? Really interesting question. Also, just to point out, Jaden's made a good point at the bottom. Don't feel that you all need to answer each question. So please jump in where you feel it's relevant.
I think in the process of decolonizing and decarbonizing, especially within materials, I think sort of looking at the sort of infrastructural systems behind the materials enables you to sort of naturally decolonize them when you're looking at the material. Because I think definitely in my research and practice that you definitely have to sort of strip everything back down to its sort of natural process. And I feel like in a way of researching a material, you are sort of decolonizing it in a way of taking it away from the kind of means that has come to through consumerism or capitalism or whatever. So I definitely think it has been maybe a challenge to overcome, but also a sort of natural process by looking at material, because you always have to revert to its sort of natural form in a sense.
Any other thoughts at all?
Yeah, early on in my project, I was looking at polyurethane foam and the production of polyurethane foam, and then I traced back this chair to look at that. And then I found out how much of a global toxic industry it was. And then it was quite nice in my own projects when I got towards the end to try and localize the materials and localize the workforce. And so that was my aim of decolonizing it, to make sure workers are treated more fairly by a more localized approach.
I wonder whether materials is kind of the space where there's a big overlap between agendas of decolonizing and decarbonizing, where they kind of become the same, thinking about our kind of viewing of materials as a resource purely for our own gain, and obviously this kind of, I don't know, histories of global expansion based on kind of the production and consumption of resources. That seems to link quite well to a question that Sital has asked in the chat, which is, what value systems beyond the economic are you now considering within your own architectural practices?
For my project, value systems was quite an important part of it. So because I was looking at the fashion industry, there's already a lot of problematic things that they deal with, mainly to do with like exploitation, extraction, expense. So I was trying to rethink these systems and how I could make something that is with a new value system that kind of aligns itself more with community, inclusivity, ecology, visibility, transparency. All these kind of things are topics that I kept on interacting with. Yeah.
Yeah, I also tried to challenge conventional value systems. I think in my project, the community could come in, and if they participated in the algae harvest, they'd harvest the algae and exchange that for a free blank record that they could then record any song onto. And the idea was that there'd be a new sort of value system with culture embedded into community participation. But it was actually quite tough trying to come up with a transaction that isn't monetized. What was an interesting challenge.
I think through my project, kind of looking at, and I think in general that for all of us, looking at materials, looking at on face value, a lot of, especially kind of in the food industry, looking at how things are valued there, and looking into the context, realizing the real cost of things, and the monetary value of things does not correlate at all with the cost for the environment and for people involved in certain systems. So I think kind of extending, creating new value systems that look beyond kind of the traditional ones we currently have for certain things, I think has been a part of all of our journeys. But I found it really interesting looking at the work of Caroline Steele, and she says she's an architect but looks a lot at food, and says now she approaches every project thinking about how food gets involved in the architecture she looks at. And I found that really interesting, as kind of food is such a base thing, but in so many architectural projects I've been involved in, that's never really a part of the conversation. So I think a lot of the conversations in general we've had around materials, kind of bringing them back into the discussion when thinking about embarking on a new project, and the things that need to be discussed, the things that need to be brought up.
Super, thanks. Sounds like maybe these kind of spaces where some of you are starting to talk about kind of non-human perspectives is where also kind of questions around things outside of economics can come in. A quick question, or not quick question, a question from Andreas. Andreas says, well done, everyone. My question is, how do you or did you test your propositions to find out if they're successful, and whose feedback is and was the most important to you? And I wonder if connected to that, I had a question written down about, materials being maybe intrinsically around making stuff or about making stuff. Obviously, it's been kind of, rubbish conditions in terms of access to facilities for making stuff. But I wonder if there's been any ways in which you found it interesting to make things at home over the last few months as well. Yeah, over to you guys.
I think this was quite an interesting challenge for me personally, the design of a board game, which initially was produced physically. However, I realized that I didn't have the means due to COVID to actually use this as a tool to engage with people. But in doing so, I think it made me really critically look at how I present my work and how I present my ideas or methodology. And in doing so, I realized the digital space might be where my work is best suited. So I began to project board games onto the digital sphere and test them out with key stakeholders of the pub I was working with. So the key owners at Vox. And then to answer the second part of the question, I think I'd initially looked at the clients, as in the people who own the space of Vox, as people that test this game methodology with. However, I actually got the most feedback and the most kind of insight from the communities who exist within that space and who drink the alcohol that Brett exists within. And kind of the stories and narratives ultimately, when I share my projects, were very imperative for me. Were kind of crucial for the project as a whole. So yeah, it was definitely a challenge though.
I think with particularly with CTAL, we were having lots of conversations about really looking beyond the physical or physicality of your material. So particularly for me, I decided to look at mycelium as a metaphor, but only after I looked at mycelium physically, because when you think of material, you think of its sort of physical nature as your first nature. So I think probably one of the biggest things to overcome is actually not looking at it physically and looking at it metaphorically and kind of understanding its value system and the way it operates in order for it to take it onto your project, I guess. And I think through that you sort of understand the material better and can apply it better.
Yeah, my project was quite involved with making things. I wasn't so hindered by COVID. I just had to use more low-key production techniques. So I got my sewing machine out and I started experimenting with fabric and seeing how fabric could influence the built environment or designing architecture. And it was quite a personal kind of experience, really, because I really got to feel the materials and just find new ways of implementing them into my projects. But yeah, I thought it was good, it was fun.
Yeah, making was quite a crucial part of my project also, because they're trying to make like an algae resin, and the algae acting as a bio-based polymer with the similar properties to plastic. But it basically involved getting seaweed posted up from Cardiff, drying it out, sticking the house out, and trying to make this resin after several batches. But it was a really enjoyable experience and made it seem a lot more real and tangible, which was nice, like feeling it and touching it.
Did you make the algae record?
That one, unfortunately not. I only got so far in the prototyping. I think I've realized I need an injection molder to make the perfect size, but I think that's my summer project. I'm determined to get it.
Can't wait to hear it at the next broadcast. CTAL's just written in the chat, the immaterial world is just as important as the material world, which feels very poignant in this kind of world of webcams. And that maybe connects to a question from Zainab in the chat, who asks, did looking at materials spatially expand or challenge your perspective of how the practice of architecture is situated within the within the city or networks of people that make the city what it is? So I guess maybe a question about connecting to people and groups and social connections, and how your projects have been able to touch on some of these things.
I think this one's quite relevant to my project personally, just because I've been looking at a material in more of a metaphorical sense, and how that connects, or we can learn from it in which to build a network, and then reach people through that way. So I definitely think or sort of building on what I was saying earlier, it's not all about the physical sense. And definitely, like Sitaus says, sort of at one with the materials and making kin with them, and then expanding them for other people to respect and build on.
And maybe it's especially strong or visible when you're talking about working in the places that you live or that you come from. You know, see that in Callum or Flynn's work, or in Raga's work, especially. I guess thinking about place is always hard when you're not able to spend so much time meeting people in a place. Any other questions in the chat at all before we wrap up in a couple of minutes' time? I don't know if there's any thoughts.
Yeah, just to make another point about the previous question, I think when looking at my site, particularly in Port Talbot, I had to reevaluate assess people's relationship to the material of steel, because it's a town dominated by steel and the steel industry, and then evaluate what was good about their relationship with steel and what I wanted to project into a more environmentally friendly material, and a new focus on that, and whether that was the right approach. So it's that relationship that was interesting for me.
Jaden points us towards a question around COVID, which I think we touched on a little bit, but maybe we return to. Charlie asks, everyone has completed these amazing projects during the COVID pandemic. How has this impacted on your approach? Or has this impacted on your approach, and how?
So my project specifically was based around how COVID affects young children and their relationships with microbes. I think, yeah, the pandemic and lockdown specifically played a huge factor in my project's design.
The hardest part for me was the critical engagement aspect of it. So trying to connect with stakeholders and things like that. For example, I was like knocking on doors to try and do a questionnaire, but it just felt really uncomfortable about doing it because I knew that I don't know what people might think about me turning up at their door. But yeah, just things like that was kind of difficult, but you can work your way around it.
Cool. Maybe on that note, we can do a little handover to the next group. I think we've covered all the questions that have been asked. Some really beautiful work, some incredible representations of the work as well. You know, some beautiful films, some amazing drawings. I'm sure this is on behalf of everyone in the chat and watching the film, watching the stream rather. But thanks so much for sharing your work with us. To those of you who are watching, we're going to just take a couple of minutes to swap over. We'll let you have a short break and we'll be with you in about 5 minutes time. Any final thoughts from you guys before we wrap up?
Just say it's been a really good year. Really enjoyed it so far. And cheers, guys.
All right, see you all in a few minutes time.
This is a project about the transformative potential of a journey and how the embodied experience of movement at different speeds can allow us to connect with and read the latent structures at work in the city. The project resuscitates an ancient pilgrimage route through the Upper Lee Valley. It provides the tools for the area's residents to embark on their own transformative journey, one which not only provides an embodied understanding of the abstract and undemocratic forces of development, but that also connects the individual to the layers of communal value and experience that overlay the landscape. You step outside of the repetitive constraints of your everyday existence. Incidents of everyday infrastructure are transformed into way stations. You undertake the rituals of embarkation, receiving your totems and guide for the long journey ahead. The route guides you to the train stations, the great symbols of speed and progress that stretch like a string of pearls across the Lee Valley. They bring with them whispers of a sleek, high-speed future when Crossrail will carve its way across this landscape like an artery pumping capital from the heart of the city. Your steed provides a kick to ensure that your path is the right one. It tells your body as you cross an invisible border, that of a growth area, and you start to read this latent infrastructure's influence on the surroundings. The haptic connection between your body and the surface mingles with a vibration, like an invisible hand that guides you towards a network of valuable spaces. Those marked on the map are places of shared communal memory, whose future is being shaped by those forces of development flowing into the valley. You touch the shrine itself, and through this touch, its importance flows into you. You flow into the hidden corners and forgotten folds of the landscape, responding to the tactile guidance of the vibrating handlebars. Others before you have marked their own valuable spaces, and this hidden knowledge now pulls you towards it. You find these shrines, mirrored stickers with tiny GPS beacons. They're a free surface where another pilgrim has left their mark on this place. Parachutes deployed to provide resistance proportional to the average property value of each movement space through which you pass. The community infrastructure levy of major developments affect the primary parachute's deployment and acts as a proxy to provide a kinesthetic mapping of a murky world that is most often hidden from sight. You read places that do not yet exist, but that act on a time frame that is usually beyond our daily perception. Just as the pilgrims to Santiago de Compostela carried stones and placed them along the way, you mark your own special places with a piece of yourself, using the totems that you've carried with you. You stop to rest from your long journey at a way station. The shrines that you have touched on the route allow you to exchange for supplies for the road. You reach the final destination of your journey, the symbol of movement, speed and progress that draws a sharp boundary around London. Over time, shrines themselves layer up around the valley's movement spaces as more and more people make the journey, each of them being transformed in some way by the city and reciprocally transforming the city itself. The repetition and ritual practice means the journey can be taken many times, each time a new transformation taking place. The pilgrimage crosses the boundaries of 3 boroughs, fostering a sense of connectedness and community across the entire Lee Valley area, as well as a greater embodied communal sense of the forces shaping the future of the valley.
Strolling down same high street, the woman now behind, her friend needing pushing, steep pavement so unkind. Steering around the cobbles on a pavement so narrow, trying to dodge the surrounding buildings, ignoring the pointless arrow. Crossing the busy junction, finding the next drop in the curb, taking a 5-minute detour, anything other than superb. Cars whoosh past, so reckless and careless, another thing to worry about, no one having an awareness. Street signs, plant pots, bollards too. Why so inappropriately placed? I can't even fit through. Entering the convenience store with awkward navigation, people jump to open the door, aware of the situation. This junction is where Market Square meets London Road in Bicester, my nearest town. It is a very busy junction with fast-moving traffic with very little opportunity for crossing safely. Through observation, I believe that an emphasis on the following points could create an attractive public space for all. Pedestrian priority versus vehicle priority. Raising the level of the road could give pedestrians a sense of priority over the vehicle, as well as creating a safer environment. Reducing vehicle speed, introducing speed to control measures. Flexible movement versus fixed movement. Through removing the idea of channeled movement, I feel that a welcoming and free-flowing space should be designed to encourage social engagement. And lastly, to minimise physical barriers and obstacles. In order to encourage accessible and flexible spaces, I feel as though there should be minimal clutter where possible. Whilst observing the junction, I noticed how able-bodied people could move freely through the space at comfort in order to access anywhere they wish to go. These people are represented in black thread. Large planters and signs, represented by large nuts and bolts in this model, are physical barriers which make moving through the space uncomfortable and challenging to those with wheelchairs, walking aids and pushchairs. I also observed that these people would have to travel to the nearest curb drop in order to cross safely and comfortably. These are represented with white thread. The aim of this project has been to identify and become aware of the physical barriers wheelchair users have to face and the things they have to do to work around these. Using the idea of threads representing movement, I have designed a cushion to be gifted to policymakers at my local council. Using an everyday object is to remind policymakers of the physical barriers wheelchair users have to face day to day and to encourage them to consider wheelchair users much more. The front of the cushion highlights the restricted access and flow of movement for mobility impaired and partially impaired people compared to the able-bodied people on a particular difficult junction. It is ironic to use a cushion, which can be seen to be an item of comfort, to represent the discomfort of movement through space, and is therefore a gift which is unique and symbolic. If you feel strongly about a particular area in your local town with physical barriers affecting your movement and comfort, please get creating.
This project aims to uncover how to create a shift in a person and a place. In an attempt to reappropriate our streets, the theory that underpins this project is detournement. This work is politically educative and negates the original ideological conditions of a space or an object. So let's begin. I'm an architect working in Hackney. When the world woke up to the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, I started questioning the statue of Robert Jeffrey that sits above the Museum of Home. During these protests, the street was full of the local community campaigning to remove the statue. However, the museum had been closed for the past few years due to refurbishment. Now the museum has just reopened, yet the statue still remains. They released a statement yesterday saying, "To celebrate the reopening of this public space, we are hosting an all-day creative workshop. Here, we would like to reinterpret and contextualise the statue by reflecting on the uncomfortable truths of this man." Luke from Hackney Quest said they're looking for facilitators to support them, an opportunity we couldn't miss. After months of planning, we are holding our workshop today. I just hope we can get the support we need to create change and shift perceptions. Together we can finally decolonise and reclaim this space. Anya's running the bunting workshop. She's gathered the most beautiful scrap fabrics, each representing the home in a different way. It's only 11 AM, but time seems to be flying by as I make posters with a group of kids. As we make posters, we chat about their local heroes and the statues they are designing. Once the hype to remove the statue diminished, Jermaine wanted to build a space for conversation about these contested areas, designing a seating area for the community to grow. Jermaine's workshop teaches young adults how to build this seating space. As I watch, you see Jermaine spark curiosity and conversation with this pivotal generation of young people. Over there, I can see Sonia is planting our new community herb garden. This patch will be community-led, where locals can grab their favourite herbs for dinner. Sonia is teaching Lily and Isaac how to cook with each herb. Before she gets a chance to explain, the kids are too excited and start digging. Sonia's recently joined the board of trustees for the museum. Her voice lends a new perspective to the board and can guide the conversation to be more representative. We encourage local artists to get involved in today. The neon installation is an iconic quote by Ella Fitzgerald. She was a spearhead in the civil rights movement and paved the way for black females in the creative industry. Then I noticed the serene sculpture of a female figure beneath the trees. I start talking to Elisa, the artist who designed her. She grew up in Hackney and wanted to represent the strong female figures in our borough. The statue clearly grabs the attention of passers-by as a crowd gathers around her. We positioned her opposite Robert Jeffrey, a direct play on power, as an old way of thinking meets the new face of the future. Sonia and I take a moment to reflect on our day. It's been a whirlwind of high-flying emotions and honest conversations. Our attempt to decolonise the space relied on Hackney's locals. Seeing the engagement from everyone was more than we could have imagined. This graphic novel shows how a series of creative workshops can disrupt, reinvent and shift perceptions of space.
The A-board, a surface of advertising. It sleepily sits, ignored and bored, as shoppers pass it by. The lady laden with groceries, the shopkeepers clattering their boxes of wares for display, and the man on his phone, animated and chuckling to the unknown caller. It hears great tales of people's day, snippets of conversations in a colourful tapestry of languages. Some would call them unremarkable, mundane even, but this little sign yearns to join in. One day, the board awoke in a start. The familiar feeling of its owner pulling and opening its rusty joints, suddenly unfamiliar. To its amazement, its once small and creaky form had been transformed into a towering, yet empty, sign. A seat now nestled between its frame. But how did this happen? As the board scanned the street it was so accustomed to, other strange devices were appearing. A banner spanning the emerald trees declared, "Harlesden, tell your story." 2 girls whom the board recognised tentatively approached it. Scrawling atop its surface in a fat blue pen, they told their tales of childhoods amongst a reggae beat. Artists appeared too, those wielding pens, cans and brushes, and others wielding their mics. Some still strode past, too busy to engage, but intrigued to see a version of their home they finally recognised. As the day faded away with the light, the pavement still buzzed, electrified with the renewed current of narratives weaving through its cracks and crevices. The board felt light with the weight of stories as the shopkeeper tucked it away for the night. The event of listening may be over, but interactions weave themselves into the board's new days. Some perch on it, some draw on it or tag it, some stand and discuss their art with shoppers. Over time, the power of listening started to take effect. The empty shop by the grocers, sadly abandoned in the pandemic, now holds artists in residence from around Brent. The pull-down benches, now taken over with public workshops when it's warm, spilling out across the wide pavement in competition with the fruit and veg stalls. The music booms from car stereos as always, but now the sun had appeared. The trustees of Craven Park Road Trust meet in their usual spot. Their next International Reggae Day celebrations are discussed beneath a tropical blue canopy. Power of their road can no longer be held by another. Now their stories have been listened to and their narrative reclaimed.
Dark streets, people lurking in the shadows, senses heightened to the point where every footstep echoes around your mind. It's 5 p.m, walking home from work. It's 1 a.m, walking back from the pub. It's 7 p.m, just popping to the shop to buy milk. It's 9:30 p.m, returning home from a friend's house. But this point of inquiry began at the canal. So, dear canal, can you believe that a year has passed and we are still trapped inside our house? I've turned to you to escape. Beneath the bustling streets and constant buzz, the honking engines' shouts are absorbed in your stale water, and I am transported away from the city. But at night, you scare me. Inserting joy and light doesn't seem to make me feel any more courageous. How strange. These past few weeks, we've been consumed by the obligatory chorus of women taking to social media, amplifying stories, mourning and expressing their disgust. The solidarity of women, yet emptiness of the expressions. The empty gestures accumulating to create a spectacle where the message has become an ostentatious display of women's fear. The fetishization of it. Affirmation that women are helpless, unable to exert control of her own safety. She did everything right, a phrase that had lingered with me. As women share their protective rituals, keys clenched between knuckles, being on the phone with someone, rope alarm in pocket, knowing full well these defensive measures will do little to defend them. From the men who feel entitled to mutter, shout, leer, touch, grope and grab. All of this to say, I'm at a loss. I do not know the answer. The phrase, educate your son, appears across the internet. To think that we live in a society where men, boys, have such little moral integrity that they feel they can treat women like ragdolls to play with. And who will be educating them? Mothers, grandmothers, wives, sisters, teachers. And educate them on what? To reinforce that women are vulnerable and we must not harm them? As a spatial practitioner, where can I intervene? This is ridiculous, right? But propositions become trivial. They remind us that the responsibility of our safety, my safety, is my own responsibility. In order to protect myself, I must become a human shield, a GPS device. I must move silently whilst emanating light from every orifice. I must be both intimidating and invisible simultaneously. I must deflect unpleasant comments and always be accompanied by friends. Isn't this absurd?
I invite you to join the Safe Space Revolution, a vision for an alternative future where taking a private moment for yourself is valued as a fundamental right. This is a campaign for change, to enable the individual to access a place of mental retreat at any time, in any place. My proposition is a toolkit for resilient practices in the public realm, providing a means to establish physical boundaries that reflect a mental state. This proposal is about enabling people to feel at ease to take a private moment and prioritise mental health when necessary. To better understand this campaign, I will take you on a short journey, following the life of Iman, a fictional ambassador who becomes a part of the Safe Space Revolution. Iman seeks advice online regarding her mental health. She comes across an emerging Safe Space campaign where she can purchase a toolkit for resilient practices in the home and public spaces. As part of her toolkit, Iman puts up her Safe Space poster in a zone of her flat share. She defines this space as being her refuge in times of crisis, where she is able to zone out, calm herself, and just be without being disturbed. Iman begins her daily commute. She is surprised by the number of people in her tube carriage wearing items found in her toolkit. Previously, she hadn't noticed this, but she is now more aware and makes sure not to invade their space. Inspired by her fellow pedestrians, Iman decides to don her Safe Space earrings. Iman talks to her co-workers about how the Safe Space toolkit has empowered her to define her boundaries both in the home and in public places. Her co-workers love the idea and discuss how to establish zones of safety in the workplace. The Safe Space movement begins to gain momentum amongst individuals and corporations. Bring Your Own Safe Space collaborates with Thrive London to reappropriate corners in the public realm, permitting people to take a moment for themselves. Following its success in London, other local councils run similar campaigns in popular public spaces. 5 years down the line, the Bring Your Own Safe Space movement has achieved mainstream recognition. In the UK, if people are seen to be standing in a corner, it is no longer viewed as shady behaviour. Instead, the need for a personal moment is acknowledged and people respond accordingly. This widespread recognition paves the way for more overt methods of defining personal space. The use of the Bring Your Own Safe Space deployable privacy hat becomes normalised as an essential staple of public life. The UK Safe Space campaign gains international attention, and similar movements start popping up in cities across the world. The corner becomes a global symbol for safety and is added to Apple's emoji library and Microsoft's status badge options. Mental health is not a shameful, taboo, or dirty thing, and this campaign seeks to normalise practices that protect it, to shift perceptions about mental health, helping people to say, "This is my personal boundary," and making the discomfort of asking for a moment a much less daunting. So, are you ready to join the Safe Space Revolution?
A human illusion of spatial separateness. The space in between. The space where inner and outer reality become one single entity. The shadow. A simultaneous feeling of anonymity and exposure. The movement. A dynamic oscillation in between blurred realities.
My project challenges the space where inner and outer reality, the private and the public space, come together and blur into one single entity. Exploring the oscillating movement between those blurred realities, my work questions the prefabricated and human illusion of spatial separateness. The spatial proposition is a floating modular platform structure on Regent's Canal in London. Some platforms are covered by internally illuminated and slightly translucent bubbles. Entering one of these private spaces, the moving body creates shadows on the surrounding skin, visible from inside and outside. Without visual contact to the potential public audience, the projected person experiences simultaneous feelings of presence in public space and yet anonymity in the own uncertain shadow. Observing someone's projected self, liberated in the private moment and simultaneously occupying the surrounding public space, evokes awareness of those separated realities as one blurred entity.
I smile across the intersection. I recognize the woman standing there. She usually joins on a Saturday. I don't know her name, her background, or her job, but I know her well. I know the way she laughs, the way she moves, what expression she makes when she's embarrassed, how she flinches when she's startled. I know her favorite movements are the ones that reach upwards so she can throw her head back to face the sky. There are lots of people here today. Some I recognize, most I do not. I assume the exercise was started by a facilitator, but they've left now. The guided workshop ends at 11. Passers-by are used to this by now. They know what to expect when they reach the movement exchange. For some, it's the reason they've come, and they pause to watch a while, perching on one of the ledges along the side. Most of us start off like this, just listening, before we summon up the courage to join in. I barely remember what it was like back when nothing ever happened here. The space must have looked much the same as it does now, but I never really paid attention to it. Funny to think how oblivious I was. I've gotten to know it so much better now, just like I've gotten to know the people. I now know exactly where every crack in the paving is, and how many runs I can do from one end before I have to swerve to avoid the railing. I'm so glad it was chosen as the site of the movement exchange for our area. Apparently the council did an experiment to decide which of the dead spaces around here would work best, with the help of a dancer, of course. It's easy to see why they chose this one. It doesn't look like much, but it gets very lively. Lots of people pass through on their way down to the river, but I never used to have a sense of how many people actually live here. It's nice to see some evidence of life, to know that the flats aren't all just empty. It helps when there's a facilitator here. I've been amazed at how rich our borough is in practitioners from every discipline who've taken this opportunity to practice, perform and teach. Sometimes we get guest facilitators from other boroughs too. There's a program that allows practitioners to swap and tour around the city in a carefully choreographed sequence of events. I've even started visiting other movement exchanges whenever I'm in a different area. It's easy to look up your nearest one. Some are still in their infancy, with just 1 or 2 people performing or practicing there once in a while, perhaps an old bench dragged over to the side. But we know that over time they'll grow. If one person starts to dance, it gives permission for others to do the same. The more established groups have managed to secure funding for purpose-built seating or hard surfacing. When I visited Brentford, I was so jealous of how smooth their paving was. They even had some colourful blocks which people were using as stages and seating. But the real value lies in the human connections. I've lost count of how many people I've met through the movement exchange. Some I chat to on the side, but many I know only through their fictions and movements. I like it that way. It means nobody has to share anything they don't want to. There are no expectations because we're all strangers, leaving us free to experiment and surprise each other and ourselves. It is, after all, only an extension of the choreography of interaction that happens at every intersection in the city.
The liminal playground gives permission to the public to find moments of enjoyment in the city through engagement with ubiquitous urban infrastructure, whilst encouraging creative interaction with local spaces to foster a sense of agency in the built environment. Our experience of the city is mediated by the constant navigation of boundaries and borders, theorised by Richard Sennett as the difference between hard edges, boundaries, and liminal spaces with the opportunity for interaction, borders. Too often, public spaces for play and enjoyment are enclosed by fixed boundaries, compartmentalising public activities and engagement. Moving beyond the boundaries of traditional public parks, there is an abundance of in-between space in the city, spaces that offer opportunities for a diverse inhabitation of the urban realm. Combining Helen Kindred's understanding of the in-betweenness as a space for alternatives, with Anne Bogart and Tina Landau's 9 viewpoints of performance, presents a new framing of interventions in public space. Initial public reaction was a mixture of intrigue, enthusiasm, and some concern for safety.
Putting up a swing.
Huh?
Putting up a swing.
Making a swing?
Yeah.
Good one.
That looks nice. Thank you.
Is there children gonna be there? Because, you know, when they're gonna play, they're gonna hit this, or no? Or you are not doing it for children?
Just temporarily.
Well, I thought maybe you live around here and you are making for your,
yeah, I live just over there.
for your own children, you know, to play.
Oh, right.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Employing the performance viewpoint of kinesthetic response, combined with the community centre as a trusted local facilitator, and utilising the permission granted by the council to close roads for residential street parties, temporary boundaries to vehicles are created. These grant permission for the local public to create temporary situated structures that broaden engagement from incidental spectatorship to embodied sensory experience of public liminal space. Following the creation of the liminal playground, most play structures are passed on to other community centres to continue the creation of temporary creative spaces throughout the city. However, a few remain as remnants, and as local residents pass by, they are reminded of their creative agency in these in-between spaces. Some even stop to relive the joyful sensory experience.
A Manual for Unproductive Collective Constructions is a booklet which speculates at the potential for construction to be a space to mediate difference. The manual is informed by previous work that focused on overlooked landscapes, violence within architecture and the innate power of objects, as well as research into the theories of care and the care crisis, and by observations of the performative aspects of care and construction. The care crisis is in part due to reproductive labour being seen as less valuable and unproductive in neoliberal terms, and care being siloed within nuclear family structures. Unproductive collective constructions seek to obliquely address the crisis in care by focusing on these aspects. Firstly, by acting as a starting point for creating care infrastructures which move beyond those siloed within nuclear families, or those reliant upon problems in common, and in advocating for the unproductive. It seeks to add greater value and emphasis on labour outside of neoliberal frameworks. The manual would be cheaply printed, located at points of convenience and disseminated like ruderal plants. It would be underpinned by a publicly funded, reclaimed materials yard and an infrastructure that could connect different self-organised groups. The manual would give reason for people to collectively gather, to make direct interventions within their local landscape, to realise a greater sense of agency. Unproductive collective constructions utilise the performative aspects of care and construction. They seek to interlink otherwise disparate people. The manual and structures are seen merely as a starting point. These self-organising groups would replicate, and by directly intervening, groups of people would realise a greater degree of agency than had previously existed. This agency and organisation realised through unproductive collective constructions could be harnessed in more urgent, less superfluous pursuits, in how we build houses and organise labour, for instance.
Hello, hello. We should be live and direct from CSM to the world, dispersed across the UK and beyond. Hi again, everyone. Good evening. It's now properly dark outside, isn't it? Welcome to the Unit 1 broadcast. Welcome back for those who were here earlier and who've been joining so far. For those who've just joined recently, hi, I'm Cameron. I'm hosting the broadcast. I work on the course as an archivist, and over the last few months I've been delving into broadcasting and much to the world. Sorry for everyone that's had to hear this 3 times, by the way. It's a real pleasure to be here and really, really nice to see all of you in the audience. I see a couple of former students out there in the chat. Hi to everybody. Yeah, it's really exciting to introduce this cohort of students who've been producing some incredible work under really kind of tough conditions. So for those who are not familiar with the way that this course works, the first year of the course, Unit 1, is split into 3 groups or labs. So the broadcast that you've just seen shows off the beautiful, poignant and meaningful work to emerge from Lab C, which focuses on movement and is taught by Dr. Adeshola Akinleye and Akil Scaife-Smith. Just before this, we watched Lab B's work, which looked at materials, taught by Sital Solanki and Natsai Audrey Chiesa. And earlier on at lunchtime, we saw the work of Lab A, a technology lab tutored by Suhair Khan and Jaden Ali. So we'd really love to have some questions from the audience. Please do get them ready. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce Kerry to tell you a little bit more about the work of Lab C.
Hello everyone, thank you for watching. So in this lab, we've been looking at spatial practice through the lens of movement, understanding that movement is the recognition of change through the relationship of space and time. We began this lab with a series of embodied exercises, exploring the relationship of our bodies to space. This formed the basis of a somatic understanding that was carried forward into our projects. We all want to say a huge thank you to Adeshola and Akil for their amazing guidance and support through the development of our projects. So thank you.
Super, thanks, Kerry. I'm actually going to hand back over to you guys again quickly, just so that we can run through all of the work in the order that we saw it, just to kind of jog everyone's memory in the audience.
Okay, I think that's me up first. My project, The Opportune Pilgrim, is about the transformative potential of journeys in the city and how the embodied experience of movement at different speeds can allow us to connect with and read the latent structures shaping the urban future and counter the alienation of modern life. The project resuscitates an ancient pilgrimage route through the Upper Lee Valley, providing the tools for the area's residents to embark on their own transformative journey, allowing the body to respond to the environment in different ways and begin to make their own marks amongst the strata of individual and communal importance amongst the landscape. It connects them with and reads the different forms of value that overlay and shape the spaces of movement, fostering a multi-layered and deep-rooted sense of place, as well as a greater sense of collective ownership in the face of external forces.
I think I'm next. So in my project, I explored the movement in towns and cities from the perspectives of underrepresented groups in society. And this acknowledged how spatial experiences can differ according to someone's ability. I particularly explored movement, accessibility, and comfort.
Hi, I'm Connie. Stop to Shift is a portfolio of work that uncovers the potential of protest and activism in the built environment and its ability to shift perceptions of space.
Connie, can you put your microphone a bit closer to your mouth? Sorry, you're really quiet. You might need to start again.
Is that okay? Can you hear me a bit better? Brilliant. I'll start again. Hi, I'm Connie. Stop to Shift is a portfolio of work that uncovers the potential of protest and activism in the built environment and its ability to shift perceptions of space. So throughout this project, I have devised a series of workshops that aim to shift perceptions of contested spaces, drawing awareness to different forms of racial oppression found in our public realm. Thank you.
And hi, I'm Katie. My project is framed on narratives of the city and kind of the stories invisibly existing in the spaces we inhabit and the traces of our time continuum in place and our experiences which weave together, bringing the material architecture to life. And I'm operating in the space where the flow of narratives of place are out of sync, where there are some given more importance and others some ignored or commodified. And I'm interested as a spatial practitioner in how I can listen to these narratives and how, when listened to, they can better shape the city.
Hi, I'm Polly. My project took me through explorations of ways we can shift perception of dark and unsafe spaces. So I used the canal as a case study, and final kind of exploration was a physical manifestation of protective rituals undertaken by women and other marginalised people in these spaces, and looked at open dialogue, and it's become especially relevant in these past few weeks.
Hi, I'm Sadaya. So my Safe Space project was about negotiating the boundaries between the private sphere and the variety of different micro-publics that exist in a contemporary society. So my toolkit is the first step of this evolving methodology concerned with the exploration of community welfare and well-being, and more specifically, how we as spatial practitioners could intervene and equip individuals with the tools for self-enrichment. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Cameron. So my project explores the different states of matter and the transition as a movement through the different states of being. The short film I produced comments on the two perspectives witnessed when we're born, our perception of self in the world and the perception the world has on us. As time progresses, we transition through these different states of being, adding or shifting parts of our identities to reach enlightenment towards self-awareness. And being aware of self in space can allow for a creative process of lived bodily experience in public and private space.
Hi, I'm Antonia. My proposition questions the illusion of spatial separateness of private and public and evokes a back and forth movement in between both spheres. This connects with my initial study of the Möbius strip, an object that continuously oscillates between inside and outside and blurs the borders of those two separated spaces. The film you've just seen encapsulates this in-betweenness and the experience of being private and being public at the same time, because the moving shadow simultaneously creates inner feelings of anonymity and privacy, and on the other side, exposure in public space. Perceiving the own self and the own perception shifting between the private and the public, those two spheres are not spatially fixed anymore, and one gets aware of these interactive and dynamic blurred realities. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nina, and my project is about using movement as a way to facilitate interaction and listening between strangers in underutilized public spaces. It includes a set of guidance for councils and a series of case study performances which act as a way to test levels of engagement in different sites. Throughout Unit 1, I've been developing a definition of listening as checking in with your own senses, spending time with, paying attention to, connecting and interacting with a person, place or thing. The movement exchange is a method to encourage all these kinds of listening to take place in public spaces.
Hello again. My project, The Liminal Playground, explored how we navigate borders and boundaries in the city, proposing ways that these could be reappropriated or subverted through the implementation of playful urban interventions, and ultimately giving permission to the public to have embodied sensory experiences of public space, and inviting them to recognise their own creative spatial agency.
Harry, you've muted yourself again. You might want to click again.
Yeah, I think my internet's quite slow. So my video is for a manual for unproductive collective constructions. The manual would use construction as a medium for creating new bonds between people and for mediating differences. It would be a loose set of examples and instructions which hope to realise a greater sense of agency and self-organisation that could then be harnessed in less superfluous pursuits.
Super duper. Thanks so much, everyone. A few questions in the chat. Please feel free to drop some more in. First of all, from Millie. Hello, Millie. Millie says, sorry to make it all about COVID, but I really would love to know how you found it being out in public space recently performing these projects. She also asks, has the situation affected how you chose your sites?
Yeah, in my case, it definitely affected how it chose my site. So the site is actually just like the estate that I live on, and I started noticing these in-between spaces on sort of like daily walks around, and you know, that being the only sort of exercise that was allowed. And I just wanted to try and imagine new uses for these spaces that were sort of not being utilised as much as Newington Green or Clissold Park, where sort of people were flocking to. So yeah, that was a big influence.
I think for mine, it also made a big difference just to the kind of project I ended up doing, because thinking about how to interact and connect with the public in COVID is really difficult. And so I started thinking about kind of more distanced ways of measuring interaction, and kind of eavesdropping and listening and seeing how many people turn and look. So in a way, it was an interesting kind of way of making us more attuned to and more sensitive to other people.
I think I kind of found that, given the kind of COVID situation, movement and those sort of daily ritual of getting out of your house and moving became kind of doubly important at the moment. And I think because my project was kind of looking at the ideas around pilgrimage, which is the sort of thing of like stepping outside of your kind of everyday sort of mundane existence into something and kind of connecting with the wider world. I found that, and particularly through cycling, is kind of the way that I was doing that, and sort of COVID sort of pushed me kind of in the direction of thinking about the spaces that I was moving through when I was kind of making those journeys out of the kind of the constrained kind of environment that we were all sort of locked in.
Yeah, and I think we had to be inventive of how to engage with the public space. And for example, I did the shadows at my window and the house on the other side of the street, and could look on my shadows in the window. And so it was like a more distance, experiment with the shadows and the public space.
Due to COVID as well, like protest and activism has really had to take a different shape, and so that's been really interesting to explore and find different, more subtle forms of engagement to shift spaces, because you can't kind of take over public space in the same way that protests used to. So it's been good to kind of experiment with that.
Great, thanks a lot. A question from Jaden. Jaden asks, or Jaden would like to know about the core references that people have been leaning on. Maybe it's an opportunity to talk to people who aren't so familiar with movement practice and spatial practices. I, for one, would love to hear some more.
I think throughout the show, we all started off by looking at a lot of work by choreographers, and it was really interesting to see how the theories from choreography could translate into spatial practices. So we started off with Helen Kindred talking about hovering as a space for in between and a space for alternatives, and also Anna Halprin, who talks about suchness and the kind of as an essence of a thing that can be found in the way that it moves. And so that was a really interesting starting point to kind of have a new kind of perspective on how to think about architecture.
I think as well, kind of near the start, back in the kind of first term, we explored as a studio a lot of kind of oceanic philosophy, sort of non-Western philosophy, looking at kind of the interconnectedness of sort of space and time, particularly looking at time as this kind of time is kind of an essential spatial element, like the fourth dimension of space, which obviously links very strongly to like movement, because it's kind of it makes movement a kind of integral sort of factor for reading space and kind of reading architecture. So I know the kind of it was something that I think that kind of the influence of like that non-Western philosophy was quite that influenced all of us quite strongly.
Great, thanks a lot. Ben asks, aside from the COVID restrictions, it'd be cool to hear what boundaries to movement you encountered which you weren't expecting or were unaware of. Don't know if that needs expanding on, Ben. I'm not sure what you guys think.
I think for me, it maybe wasn't that unexpected, but just like the boundary of social expectation and like making the leap of going out into public space and doing our work in the public realm, overcoming that sort of personal boundary was quite a big step, I think.
I think also in our initial sort of experiments and sort of tutorials with stillness and movement, especially around the King's Cross area, we were met with like the security came up to us to try to sort of question and understand what's happening and sort of stop us from carrying out these movements, which was quite interesting. And quite a lot of our projects, I feel, had this resistance from like powers greater than us.
I think definitely for me, focusing on protest and activism, that was kind of the moment that it connected me with this project. When we were looking at stillness and moving through a public realm, how limited your movements can be or can become in different certain spaces. And so that was a real like jump board for me, because springboard for me, because it really kind of made me more aware of the different rules and regulations on space and how architecture can manipulate space and movement.
Yeah, just briefly building on what Cameron and Connie were saying, I put up the swing just around the corner from my house like a week ago, and it's been there for a while. But just yesterday, I noticed that it had been taken away, sadly. So obviously that was some intervention assumed by the council, but I don't really know. And yeah, so it was this sort of, that resistance was in play there as well.
If Priti Patel has her way, there'll be many fewer opportunities to resist. Something that's been really horrific to see over the last week. Maybe that's a bit charged for this kind of conversation. Andreas has a question. Andreas is asking, Andreas says, I'm interested in your views on scale. How do performative or movement practices gain scale? I'm also curious to know how this studio changed your own practices, daily routines or work practices. Oh, and there's a, sorry, I missed Akhil's question, so I'll go to Akhil's question in a minute.
In terms of scale, I mean, I'll just sort of add kind of what I think about like movement in terms of movement in the city, and I think like movement at speed, particularly in the kind of like using the sort of different infrastructures of movement in the city, like I don't know, like public transportation, or kind of driving or walking or moving at different speeds. I think it's kind of one of the few things that allows, on a bodily level, you as a kind of individual to access scale. So like moving across the city on a train, you kind of gain an awareness of the kind of distance between things and the way that sets of spatial relationships kind of change over those kind of like wide spatial relationships, and then as opposed to kind of like moving at a more intimate kind of walking speed, you get a much more kind of intimate reading of scale of the kind of the fine grain detail of the city. So it's kind of movement is sort of the one of the key things that I think gives you a kind of, as an individual, gives you kind of access to scale in the urban realm.
I think the tools that Adeshola has given us as a studio has sort of allowed us to place ourselves within our bodies. Sort of we come to the studio and do these sort of mindfulness exercises and routines in the morning to help us like stretch and really become within our bodies, so we can sort of have a relationship to the space that we're in and sort of contribute to our peers as well as the space.
these sessions sound a bit legendary. I've heard of them a few times now. I hope to one day have the opportunity to join in on one. We did something similar when we were in Unit 3. We did, I think, far less accomplished warm-up exercises at the beginning of our build days, but it was really, really enjoyable and nice to start, really nice way to start the day. I think Akhil's question maybe connects with what some of you were just talking about. Akhil asks, what are some of your personal positions now on stillness and movement? How do you see this integrating into your creative practice beyond uni in the anxiety-inducing near future? Or anxiety-inducingly near, I think.
I think for me, when I was doing my trying to find like an inaccessible area, it really highlighted to me how much we take for granted in terms of being able to move freely through space. So looking at how, I mean, simple things like a planter or a signpost being placed where it has been can act as a barrier to people for movement. So it does restrict that people's movement in a space that should be kind of free for all and accessible for all.
I think it was also really interesting to start the studio with exercises about stillness. And I think it made us all very aware of kind of stillness is harder to do than movement. And it's kind of, you don't see it that much in the city. And it's made me definitely question kind of the permissions to be still and what kind of gives you permission to be still in a public space and why it's so uncomfortable to be still in a lot of situations.
To build on that in a different perspective, it made me really realize how still the public realm is and how stuck quite often we find it, stuck in time and space, and whether that's due to the urban fabric it finds itself in or the community around it. It's really interesting to kind of reflect on why it's stuck or still in that space. And so that was really something interesting to kind of look into, and how we could move this like community forward and you know, hear voices and start changing this public realm to reflect, you know, diversity of today.
Maybe to wrap things up, seeing as there's nothing else happening in the chat, unless there's any more questions finally. I had a quick question. I'll just move my sheet of paper. Maybe it's a comment on the whole day's work now, having seen all the amazing films. I guess there's a lot of storytelling going on. There's a lot of this kind of amazing future casting work. I guess a lot of it is in response to the fact that we're not able to be out and about as much as we'd like to. But I wonder how you can make these stories, or what tools you feel you've been able to kind of gain over Unit 1 or through your recent work, how you can make these stories into kind of a reality, and I don't know, transform them into a kind of a set of actions or something to take with you. Maybe it's a manifesto or something, I don't know.
I think, yeah, the story has been a really useful tool as a way to kind of imagine what things could be in kind of an ideal world and in the future. And I think often it's much easier to design that than to design the first step, but it's useful to jump into the ideal thing to then see what other steps that actually need to happen to get to that place. So I think it's useful to kind of jump to the future and then go back and, yeah, go kind of reverse back to the present day and see what actually you can do now.
I think also maybe like platforms like this are really useful because stories are made to be shared, and so when you share a story it has that power to like connect with other people, and if someone responds positively to that story or, you know, wants to connect in some way, that can help build the project from there. And so it's a really useful way to be able to like come up with these stories and share them through like this sort of broadcast.
It's also been an opportunity to decentralize ourselves as practitioners from like our designs and try and imagine their impact in space. So that's been a really interesting way to kind of navigate around our projects.
I think one of the things that's kind of come out about storytelling is there's such a kind of like, so there's such an interesting link kind of between like movement and storytelling, in that like movement is sort of like storytelling is sort of the sort of linear progression of like one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. And then like, and we've all kind of in different ways been like trying to tell stories using the fact that movement kind of moves you through one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And I think like, I don't know, that it feels like a kind of, that feels like something that we're all going to kind of take into the work that we do after this, is that sort of link and that engage, that like movement as that sort of way of engagement with the story, this kind of storytelling aspect of our project, which I think is kind of an interesting new sort of learning that's come from it.
There's an artist who I really like called Mika Rottenberg, and a phrase of hers, or something that she said that I kind of took around with me for a bit, was that history is made by those who write the best or the most convincing stories. Now, I think there's probably a lot of room for critique in that phrase, but maybe it's an interesting one to wrap up on. Any final thoughts from anyone? Alrighty. Thanks to everyone who's stayed on in the audience. It's definitely dinner time now. But it's been, oh, Millie says, I love to see the Safe Space project projected so far into the future and how you've imagined it growing at scale. Yeah, anyway, thanks all. It's been really, really nice, been really amazing to see the work. So thanks so much for having me today. Thanks to the audience for joining us. Really nice to have all this feedback in the chat. It's hard, always hard when you can't see the people on the other end of the headphones. But it seems to have all gone really well. Looking forward to seeing how the work develops. And thanks to all the tutors for an amazing course. All right, can tune out now. Ciao.